Boa tarde aí a todos e todas. Por favor, vou pedir aqui o silêncio no auditório. Estamos gravando, está aqui ao vivo. Vamos começar então a palestra do professor Emile Fromet de Rosnay. Ele é professor, vou fazer uma apresentação aqui, ele é professor de departamento de francês da Universidade de Victoria, no Canadá. Ele publicou o livro Mallarméses, em 2011, sobre Mallarmé. Publicou vários artigos aí sobre ficção pós-colonial, humanidades digitais, sobre a Gamben e sobre o Gambeniste, né? E agora ele está para publicar um livro que se chama Taunting the Useful, e ele vai vir falar, ele veio falar sobre esse livro hoje. Então, Emile, it was a pleasure to receive you here. So I pass the word to you and be my guest.
Okay, well, so thanks, Fábio, enormously for inviting me here, and very happy to be on campus. I haven't been on a campus since last year, since I've been away from Victoria for a while, and so it's strange to be on a campus here as a visiting professor. So there's an inside joke there. So, and if you want to know about it, I don't think I can tell the joke. Yeah, maybe at the end. So I'm gonna talk about my book today, which is called Taunting the Useful. So I'll read a text first. It should take about 10 minutes. And then I'll just go through examples of what I mean by taunting. So taunting is a concept I came up with about 6 years ago. And I've been trying to write this book for 4 years. I signed a contract 4 years ago and I'm only finished it now. So it's a project that's taken a long time, and I think it's a good thing sometimes to let it go slowly, because you end up having better ideas later on than initially. Even if initially you have a seed of something and you've already started the process, sometimes delay is good. You know, there's a whole ethics of the slow professor and working slowly now, because we're rushed and we're told to publish constantly. So it's not always such a great thing, you know, just publishing for the sake of publishing. So yeah, let me switch to the presentation, and I'll kind of switch back and forth. Hopefully people on YouTube can hear me. So this is the cover image. It's a photo by Nathalie Leduc. It's her own project called the Photophonotron, and it's what she calls a smartphone. So it's an example of taunting. So what Nathalie does, she works with obsolete objects and transforms them into something interesting. She's also made a double-decker 4-person tandem bike that has 6 ice cream churns. And so you ride this thing, 4 people are riding it, double-decker, and it makes ice cream as you ride. And that's called the Churnatron, and it makes what she calls bice cream. So yeah, so you can get a sense of the kind of playfulness that is behind my project as well. And it's very much inspired by Nathalie Leduc's work, at least the concept. I came up with that concept while thinking about her work. So anyway, so I'm going to just start reading my text, and then feel free to interrupt me if anything's not clear, or if you disagree, or if you just feel like yelling at me or something. Anyway, so, and I'll have the text up so that you can follow the text, if it works. There we go. The ideas in Taunting the Useful emerged over a long period of time thinking about the so-called crisis in humanities, where those disciplines that constituted the first universities the liberal arts, or artes liberales, have been severely diminished in favor of the practical and applied. The university is a place where you are trained for a job rather than one where you might learn to live a good life. The modern university is embattled because the old model of intrinsic knowledge has been diminished in favor of the utilitarian rational machine of modernity, with its regime of truth located in the market. The most valuable things in life are directly useless for that modernity and only indirectly useful. Further, even saying that something is indirectly useful is to subordinate it to the gross efficiencies and instrumentalities of modernity. Even those praising the useless, such as Nuccio Ordine, fall for this trap. John Stuart Mill could easily argue that the useless can be useful in that it makes life good, yet the purposiveness of that point of view needs to be put to the test because it cannot break the means-ends bind, can easily become imperative, thus falling into the logic of debt. And here I'm thinking about Walter Benjamin's concept of Schuld, which is debt in financial, but also in moral terms. The dictum that we work to live can be reversed. We merely live to work and consume in our biopolitical paradigm. In that sense, Molière's Harpagon, who mixes means and ends, is the paragon of our times. That is, we live to eat. This book would have said that art, beauty, love, friendship, pleasure, leisure, all the things that make life good are useless. However, that assurance too can be put to the test because these good things of life can always be subsumed to the logic of instrumentality. This book resists that instrumental logic, but doesn't shy away from its challenges. When one says that friendship or love are instincts that favor survival, this sort of evolutionary thinking, which no doubt is correct, reflects the utilitarianism of our epoch. It's a matter of emphasis. What supports life, and is it relatively important to account for it when that knowledge won't actually make a difference? Yet emphasizing it can affect our perspective on the wonderful things of life, take away our valuing of them. If you say love is merely a means to a reproductive end, or that powerful feeling you had was merely infatuation or limerence, any authentic feeling of love is diminished, second-guessed, devalued. Likewise, in saying that art, critical thinking, the life of the mind, etc., are useful for society, somehow art and critical thinking are diminished because ultimately they must reach a goal and show results, and thus are secondary or subordinate to their use. It's not enough for a young person in university today to merely enjoy the life of the mind, study art, literature, performance, physics, or mathematics because these are enjoyable. They must be able to apply that learning to some end other than for its own sake. At the origin of the Western university, that is, in ancient Greece, emerged the idea that thought is the ultimate human and political ethical experience, that thought preceded any use. We are thought. To be philosophical is to be human, more accurately, to be potential. To be philosophical was akin to love, and it was philosophia, the love of wisdom. When we love someone, we don't love them for what we can get from them. We love them for their own sake, no matter what. This book is therefore both a rejection of what the modern university has become and a plea that knowledge and beauty be love. And yet, the confusion of means and ends that characterizes modernity cannot be a simple reversal. Whether we live to eat or eat to live, both are susceptible to the same logic of utility and ends. To affirm the useless is equally an impasse. This book doesn't say that only useless things are good. Rather, through a form of idiosyncratic affirmation, it praises modes, methods, gestures that take us outside of the dominant forms of modernity. One of those ways is through taunting, which, while dependent on that which is taunted, nevertheless affirms a sort of joy, a sort of sidetracking that takes the imperatives of truth onto a new threshold, destabilizing any simple relation of means and ends, thereby generating events and history, that is, specificity. Taunting is thus outside of the true, false, impossible, possible dichotomies. In more ways than I can count, this book is about errancy, about erroneous ideas, thoughts, creations, and machines. That is, useless things. It's about the adventure of the mind. Too much thinking is based on whether things are true or false, accurate or inaccurate, logical or illogical, and not enough on the adventure of thought. It's a shame that useless or erroneous ideas get rejected without being experienced, or that their experience is undervalued, chucked out like malfunctioning factory pieces, especially in the university departments of philosophical truth tables. That was a joke. This book could just as easily be titled In Praise of Useless Ideas, and it contains a ton of them, by its author just as much as by others. It embraces the erroneous, the futile, the false, the useless. One person's useful is another's useless, and vice versa. The great challenge and magic of this book is to attain the most useless thing, the purely uselessness. It's a sort of search for purity there. If wonder is the origin of philosophy, arche philosophias, according to Aristotle, and thus primordial, then the role of the university instructor and researcher is to model thought and curiosity before all else. While some research pursuits are useful for industry and society, phronesis, practical ethical wisdom, some are pure inquiry, that is, the intrinsic search for eudaimonia, happiness, the human desire for knowledge, wisdom, and creativity, arete. The liberal arts, present in most university disciplines, including the sciences, let's not forget that the sciences were also liberal arts, have a privileged role in that. The challenge is to justify that role within the funding model of the modern university. So again, the question of the useful creeps in. Even CERN, in case you're not familiar, CERN is that giant hadron collider. So the world's biggest and possibly most useless architectural project has come under fire. It's been critiqued because it's so expensive and what does it do? So obviously an implicit consensus exists as to what is relevant, but a resistance to imposed consensus by funding bodies. In Canada, we have a body called SSHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, that funds research projects, but also PhD and postdoc projects. So this kind of resistance is needed and ongoing. All is negotiation, neg otium. There's a blend here of otium, leisure, Latin equivalent of the Greek skole, leisure time, from which we get school, and negotium, the negation of otium. This book fights on behalf of otium, which is necessary for free thought and learning, but recognizes the paradox that it itself is involved in negotium. It argues that useless knowledge is good in its own right, and that the university should cultivate freedom and eudaimonia. The university is a place of wonderment, taumadzein. Sorry for those. Well, you can see the text.
Yeah, right.
So, okay. Did it mute it again? Okay. So where am I? Okay, so STEM, science, technology, and engineering, and mathematics. Some people have joked that we should have STEAM. You just add A for arts, and then somebody with chutzpah joked that it should be STEAM, so humanities. So So basically what I'm saying is that this kind of context makes slaves of us all, right? It's artis servilis, right? So all you're doing is studying for work. And of course, it has full ideological and industrial support. So last paragraph. In 1958, in her book, The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt asked what our conception of work and of labor would be in the context of a world without work, emphasizing that we have no proper notion of what the human condition is without work or after work. Today, even our holidays are work, something Jenny Odell has eloquently addressed in her book, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. Can the modern university provide an answer to this prospect of a world without or after work, when it has been almost exclusively structured as a creator of workers? My book is an attempt to answer that challenge. So, just jump back to my presentation in a second. So, are there any questions before I go into the examples? Any comments? All right. So I just want to give you an example. This is one of the things that inspired the project, because originally I had a digital humanities project that ended up being kind of useless. And I was even told by one of the techies helping me, it's like, what does this do? It's useless. And I was like, kind of, oh man, it's a bit disappointing. This project's a failure. And then a few years later, it's like, okay, well, what's a useless machine? What is a machine that does nothing? And then I just went on Google and I found out about Marvin Minsky's marvelous machine. Marvin Minsky was a computer scientist who did amazing things. He's a well-known computer scientist, but one of his most amazing inventions is the marvelous machine. And I'll just show you an example. So basically, you open the chat, you flick the switch and another switch comes in. It just basically does nothing. And it's in a circuit of the, anyway, so this is an example of a machine that does nothing, but at the same time, it creates wonder, it makes you laugh. So in a sense, it was kind of testing what you think about the useless. In some ways, the joy that it makes does actually have a use. So you can never say there's anything purely useful or purely useless. Okay. And so here's an example of this is one of the chapters. Oh, so I have to mention. Okay, so this is an experimental book. There are 144 chapters, and each chapter is 144 words long. So you can do the calculation as to how many words that is. But and often the chapters have footnotes that lead to endnotes that lead back to the chapter or to other parts of the book. And what I've done is I've put them in sequences. So I'm using sequences, which I'll talk about in a bit. So here's chapter 1, which isn't the first chapter, by the way. How is it even possible to think about a machine that does nothing? Even Marvin Minsky's ultimate machine, based on Claude Shannon's of Shannon Weaver fame, does something. It's a box with an on-off switch that has a hand that comes out of the box to turn off the switch after you turn it on, which puts one in an endless repetition. The ultimate, the last or utmost machine is also described as a useless machine. While it does nothing, it arguably produces thought, wonder, synonym of marvel, pleasure, art. As an ultimate thing, it is an impossible Nietzschean eternal return of the same, with each turn a homogeneous, even totality that, while we marvel at it, generates anxiety. The machine's work, its doing, cannot correspond evenly with its ontogenetic undoing. Its wonder and terror are the product of its ontological inversion, its taunting. So the machine taunts us. So here's an example. Okay, so I have a joke. I have another joke. When I was young, I was an athlete, a swimmer, a competitive swimmer, and I really wanted to break a world record. And I never broke a world record. But I believe that with this book, I have broken 2 world records. I believe I have created the world's most useless table of contents. So I'll just give you, show you the table of contents. So it's not just useless because it is redundant. It's also useless because the chapters aren't in that order. So again, an example of taunting the reader. So it's experimental. So I also play a lot in the book with etymology, which is useless, especially if you think about, you know, philosophical critiques of the use of etymology and so on. But actually, this is what I mean by the adventure of thought, is this useless etymology can create wondrous thoughts. So there's this expression by Les Chadocs, which is a cartoon, a French cartoon from the 70s and 80s. Pourquoi faire simple quand on peut faire compliqué? Why make something simple when you can make it complicated? So then I went and invented this term, prospoluploc So it means the art of making things complicated. So feel free to use that word in your next paper. Anyway, so my second world record is to have created the world's most useless footnote, because it's empty and it just leads to endnote. Not that funny. Okay, so this is the first chapter actually, because what I've done is ordered the first few chapters in the Fibonacci sequence, which, as you know, is 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. You add the current number with the previous one as you move along, and it's a spiral. In case you're not familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, you can find it in nature and so on. So by doing that, I'm creating meaning, but actually in the end it's meaningless. So this is just a description of the Natalie's photophonotron. So I just describe it here, and I also sort of introduce the question of wonder. The arche philosophias, origin of philosophy, came from wonder and not on account of any use. But use has dominated since the Industrial Revolution. So I've already spoken about that. Also, if you think about the 19th century, it's the beginning of utilitarianism. One of the artistic movements to emerge out of this utilitarian century is art for art's sake. So saying that art is not useful. If you want something useful, Gautier says, go to the bathroom in the house. Beauty is not useful. So there was this affirmation of art as good for its own sake, not for teaching morals and so on. And that continued through in the avant-garde movements through to the 20th century. So I do talk about that a bit in my book. So here's a glance at the chapters, the way I've ordered them. So you can see that some chapters, there's 4 chapter 1s. And so several chapters are repeated, and of course missing chapters therefore, because if you add up, then they're going to be missing chapters. So I've done several sequences. You got the Fibonacci, all the Fibonacci's are red. And so including 144, which is on the sequence. And also, so these are the main sequences. I've also invented my own sequences based on my own kind of fake math. And so you got the Fibonacci, you've got the juggler sequence. So all those chapters are about Tati, about Jacques Tati. And then the collapse conjecture. So for the collapse conjecture, if you have an odd number, you multiply it by 3 and you add 1. And then if you have an even number, just divide by 2. So if you look at the sequence here, it's 20, 10, 5, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. But when you get to 421, it puts you on an endless loop. 421, 421, 421. And so in the PDF version of my book, I've got hyperlinks. So you can click on the end notes back to the chapters. And what I do is have the reader in an endless loop in the same way. So it's taunting the reader. And then I also have use the recommend sequence. I'll just give you an example of what that sequence looks like. So the chapters are ordered like that. So it's a bit chaotic. And then, so I talk about, I need to check the time here. How am I doing for time? Okay. All right. So I'll just read this chapter. For Stéphane Mallarmé, the language machine was an impotence machine, the monstre de l'impuissance, the monster of impotency, resulted from the tricks of language, verses and their necessary enjambment, rhyme, rhythm, impeding the poet from expressing his idée, or music, philosophically aware of the limits of language itself, beyond poetry, anticipating Saussures' arbitrary nature of the sign, or Derrida's unnameable différence, machine that takes the forme informe, muette, infante et terrifiante de la monstrosité. The only solution for Mallarmé was to relinquish the initiative to words. In a letter to his friend Casalis, he proposes to kill this hydratic monster similia similibus, using the same with the same, using language to solve language, making of it an autonomous or autopoetic machine. Thus, his poems are alchemically transmuting matter autopoetically, homeopathic machines or homeotechnical machines, rather than allotechnical machines that use language as a means to an end. So here, I think I'm trying to go towards the idea of language itself being a kind of a self-creating thing. And so the book also trying to create a kind of autopoetic experience. So I'm just as Mallarmé is using language to show language, that language displays itself. This book also is trying to do the same thing. Chapter 2. So here's an example of another example of etymological play. And then chapter 42 is one of my favorites, so I figured I should read it. Readers enthusiastic about 42 in Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy are heroes of interpretation, using their powers of divination from a sense of wonder at Adams's universe, attaining levels of complication according to their mathematical and interpretational skills, dolphins swimming through the open space of the galaxy. Stephen Fry says that 42's meaning will be kept secret. This taunts readers to continue their chase of the impossible meaning question to which 42 is the answer. Formula: reading is the relation of belief and interpretation. The intensity, extensity of interpretations is directly proportional to the belief in the text. Taunting's inverse proportionality to information. Taunting, belief, interpretation, interpretanting. Taunting inverts reality, favoring nonsense against stupidity. The more we go into details, the more stupid we become. But the heroic elements of reading are like love, just for one day, a mathematics of reading. See reference here to Bouvard et Pécuchet after a discussion with Elisa. And here's another aspect. So in academia, since the theory of the 70s, there's been talk about theory being bullshit, about theory being fake and misleading, and the attempt to mystify readers with your genius or whatever, and neglecting the fact that it's experimental thought. It's trying to push the limits of what is known through experimental writing. So I address this kind of issue through a Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know if you know Calvin and Hobbes. There's a Calvin and Hobbes comic in which Calvin says he's enjoying academic writing because he can make up sentences such as the dynamics of interbeing and monological imperatives in Dick and Jane, a study in psychic transrelational gender modes. As usual, Bill Watterson is being a good prophet here. The dynamics are potential, and the being between Dick and Jane contrasts with an imperative for monological speech, as opposed to Bakhtin's dialogical, which allows for irony and double consciousness. Of course, the dynamics of interbeing are psychic. What Aristotle called psyche, is the soul, which is potentiality, synonym for dynamis, from which we get dynamic. The gender modes or modalities, i.e. their possibilities, potentialities of doing or being, are transrelational in that their dynamic enters into a relation that crosses any simple relation of discrete agents, no longer intact because of transformative dialogue. So the joke here is making sense of nonsense, but then there's a terrifying truth behind that. If you can make sense of what a machine is trying to make bullshit from, then you're pushing the limits of what language is and so on. And again, it's taunting. So it's an example of taunting. So here you have Calvin and Hobbes trying to taunt, trying to mock academic language, and I am doing counter taunt. I'm taunting back. So the empire taunts back. Why is this blank? Oh, that's it. So anyway, thanks very much for your attention. And I guess if you have any questions or comments.
Let's clap first. So here, there are some questions that people are asking on YouTube.
On YouTube?
Yeah,
okay.
should we address them here?
Yeah, maybe I should get my
Yeah,
phone.
okay. So Victor, you have them?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
There's one here, Anthony David.
Oh, Anthony, yes.
Yes.
Anthony is my I'm co-supervising his PhD.
Right. Yeah, he wrote here. I'm wondering about the return to philosophy as the love of wisdom. Is there room to reconceptualize philosophy in the modern university, not as philosophia, but as heterosophia, that is, the love of difference?
Heterosophia, yes, of course. And I think, yeah, so that's a big question. I mean, we'd have to get into the question of love. One thing that, of course, and I think I know where Anthony's coming from, it's the whole questioning of the tradition of friendship in philosophy. All the important, at all stages of history, philosophers have talked about this question of, in the West in any case, have talked about this problem of friendship, including Derrida, Politics of Friendship, and Agamben recently, because they had a feud. And so there's a whole question of friendship. Jean-Luc Nancy got involved in the fight too. So what is friendship? What is its relation to politics as well? So I think I like Simone Weil's distinction, which she's very, very much drawing on St. Augustine, but that love, so erotic love, is a dangerous model in the sense that it's a desire for the homogeneous. It's a desire to be the same with the other. So it can't be used as a sort of political model. Whereas friendship, in terms of philia, so sort of fraternité in French, brotherly love, I guess, or sibling love, it accepts the other's difference. It accepts heterogeneity. So while the erotic tends towards the homogeneous, the filial tends towards heterogeneous. So I think, yeah, I think philosophy in a sense, I mean, Montaigne was kind of talking about that too, and he's basing it on Cicero. So there are these kind of questions, and I think the term love itself potentially contains that notion of heterogeneity. Yeah, as long as we bear in mind that it's not a kind of violent form of love that wants the other to be the same. Yeah.
There's a second question here. By Rosnay.
Oh, yeah, Daromir.
Does anyone know? Has anyone posed the question, what is a book?
Aha, nice. What is a book? Well, I mean, does anybody? What do others think about what is a book? I mean, it's a huge question. It is I mean, the book is becoming irrelevant, increasingly irrelevant now, and it wasn't always relevant. You know, there's Gutenberg, and the way we conceive of the book changed since it has changed since printing. But even before, I think if you think about a table of contents or an index, and I'm drawing here on Ivan Illich's book, In the Vineyard of the Text, there he talks about how tables of contents and indices have made the book cartographic. So you think about a book as something you look down from above, and it's segmented. So it's already fragmented. So in the Middle Ages, on the other hand, you had an incipit and an excipit, the first sentence and the last sentence of a book. And what you were doing is going through the vineyard of the text. So it's a very different view of what a book is. This book is fragmentary, it's hypertextual, it's intratextual, and at the same time as it's intertextual. So it's very fragmented. I think I come from this question from my work on Mallarmé, who was working on the concept of le livre, the book with a capital L. So thinking about, well, what is a book? And one of his notions of the text is as fragment. He says, well, he made the famous poem Un coup de dé jamais n'abolira le hasard. A throw of the dice will never get rid of chance. It's a highly fragmented text. But he says that the sonnet already was fragmented. If you think about rhymes, it's already a form of fragmentation. If you think about the difference between the line and the rhythm and the necessary enjambment, it's already a form of fragmentation. So there are many ways to think about what a book is, and I think that is being challenged today. Even the way we read, we don't read the way we used to read. From cover to cover, when, like, as researchers, you have a PDF version of a book. Sometimes I don't even read it. I just search for words and I look for words. I can't read 500 books a year, but I need to consult them. So I just do a word search. So then what is a word? What is a book in that context? So it's been radically transformed, and that process since Gutenberg, but that process is accelerated since the 20th century. I don't know if that answers your question about what a book is. This book definitely, though, is in that process, in that concept of the fragment, fragmentation.
Right. More thinking.
Okay.
Ok, are there questions from the public? Só pode, se quem quiser pode fazer perguntas aí em português, a gente traduz para o inglês. I have a question though. I was thinking precisely on this issue of the book, because you said that your book is fragmentary, but on the other hand, it does point to the fact that it is a book.
Yeah.
Because it has all these like internal references, and the index is a big thing in the book. So the fact that the materiality of the book as such, right, is there. So it's a book which is self-conscious of its own status as a book, which of course, will make a huge difference when it is published in paper and online. It'll be like very different, I guess, objects. But then my question would be like, if there is a tension between the fact, this sort of like self-consciousness of the book or self-awareness of the book as book, the whole, the preoccupation would be with the positioning of the fragments and their intertextuality and the content of the fragments themselves. If there would be a tension or a discrepancy or anything between like the structure of the book in parts and the self-consciousness of the book as artifact, as material thing, and on the other hand, the theoretical, philosophical contents of each fragment taken separately.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the dream, to be able to practice that which it describes, to have that kind of and so yes, though the book is an object, it's not just something to deliver content. I consider it an object as such, ideally as a coffee table book. And then I think you told me about Kramer's coffee table book that becomes a coffee table.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I really understood your question or if I answered it.
Because if there is a tension between the objectuality of the book and the contents of individual fragments.
Yeah.
Because you could have the book, of course, it'd be a different book, but it would still share some of these qualities if you had like contents taken from other disciplines. So in a certain sense, what's important is to have 144 fragments with 144 words. That's one big idea.
Yeah.
But then these individual fragments, they are theory fragments or the literary critical fragments. So if in a sense, so if you replace a fragment by a magazine article from a fashion magazine, it wouldn't interfere that much on the structure, but to definitely interfere in the content. Right?
Yeah.
So there are these two things happening at the same time.
Yeah.
In the book, right?
Yeah. So definitely, and I think, well, just as an aside, one of my big fears is that the concept. I love the concept. I'm happy with the concept. I'm afraid that the delivery might be a bit crap. So I mean, I think that might be every author's fear. But yeah, no, for sure. I think what the main goal of what I'm trying to do with respect to that problem is to mislead and misdirect, and but at the same time, there is a tension between trying to explain the concept. So there are several chapters. And that's a problem with the aphorism, right? Because how can you have an aphorism is supposed to be self-contained, and how can you have, in some cases, 10 chapters that are in a particular sequence that are basically a sustained text? It's just one, they're written as one. So that's a kind of tension that I have. I would argue that there's just a lot of diversity there, and so there's many different styles of combination. I did kind of try to group ideas and to put them in an order that would be kind of logical. From the not the nominal, but the ordinal chapter. So the last chapter, from the first to the last chapter, that sort of order, that it kind of makes sense. But in certain cases, I try to mess with that flow, and then at the same time, I think there is. I'm still trying to get at your question, because I think it's an interesting question, I'm not sure how to answer it, but
It's almost like a form and content thing. But it's,
yeah, I know.
But it's like
but I think,
materiality of the book as an object, like self-consciously so, and the the visual contents of
Yeah.
the.
and
of
it
the
goes
book.
in, it's an infinite question, because I think at the same time, there's a PDF version and ideally a coffee table version. And the PDF version, as I was saying, is clickable. So you can go, I'm busy marking it up now. It's a huge task of trying to hypertextualize the Word document and then to convert it to a PDF. And the funny thing there is that the hyperlink functions in the way that we actually read. So, and if you think about the example of the sonnet, when you read a sonnet versus when you listen to it, there's a very different thing happening. So talking about the materiality of the book, the physical book has a different phenomenological experience. But once you know that there's a PDF with clickable links, because I do talk about that in the reader's manual, which I call How to Unuse This Book. So once you're aware of that, then it changes your experience of the material book as well, and vice versa. The coffee table book changes your experience of and your consciousness of the book as hypertextual will affect the way you understand the book. And so that problem is also at that level as well. So yeah, it's a question of, yeah, so it goes back to Dar's question about what is a book, and so I think, yeah.
Rosnay asks you again.
Okay.
So he says, it seems like the object you're creating both a book and a work of art at the same time. Would you agree? Why or why not? Then yes, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that contemporary books don't make any aspirations to also be works of art, although you just mentioned coffee table books. And then again, Emile's book calls into question a book's commodity form, a commodity that seeks to refuse its commodity form.
Yeah. So that's okay. So I'll try to address all of that. Yeah, definitely. Well, just also an aside, it's published at Puctum. It's going to be published at Puctum Books, which is open access. So it's not a book you buy. So it's definitely trying to get out of the commodification. Although maybe I'm changing my mind now, because I wouldn't mind selling books. But in any case, that's an aside. But yeah, it's definitely I think the main way I looked at that problem was through how accessible is the book. And in a sense, kind of, if you want to sell books, you have to make it accessible. But if you want to taunt, you kind of want to make it inaccessible in some way. So there was always a tension there. And sometimes the chapters I make are pure nonsense. And that interpretation of Calvin and Hobbes, I'm not convinced that it actually makes sense. And so it's kind of, so there is that question that I would tie it to commodification. So yeah, the book is obviously something to be consumed, and but in another sense, it does try to resist. And yeah, it is. So in a sense, it's participatory as well. So it wants the reader to participate in it as an object. So it's performative. It tries to get, by taunting as a form of, is a performativity. It's a performative act. And so there is that kind of tension there. And it does, so taunting is it virtualizes something. It's what it does is it highlights a difference. And I don't mean difference necessarily in Derrida's sense. I think it highlights a kind of virtuality of the book. So I think I would draw more on Deleuze in that respect by thinking of the concept as virtualizing, as a virtualization process rather than an actualization. It doesn't actualize concepts. It makes them unstable. It makes them float more than to settle into concrete actualized concepts. So as I say, it's a sidetracking. It's an attempt to sidetrack these oppositions. Yeah. In the context of utilitarianism. It's hard to look at that.
Do we have questions from the public? Just yeah. Alguém quer fazer pergunta? Senão a gente passa para... Fala, Mari. Pode falar aí.
Right to be useless or research useless, we not be
Yeah.
Useless. Maybe it sounds a little
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So the question, I forgot. I should have been repeating the question in case the.
Yeah, I couldn't hear.
Well, okay. So the question is like, essentially, if a department affirms the useless, then in a sense it might be non-existent. But also there's the question of a kind of privilege. What is the privilege of? And it's true. So going back to the ancient Greek concept of free thought, it as Hannah Arendt states, it requires slaves. You have to have slaves to be able to have leisure. But to me, then what we should do is make that available to everyone. So it's not necessarily a problem. The other question, and I think the question about it is a sort of, but then you have to think, well, what is life without it? So in a sense, it begs the question, why are we doing what we're doing? For instance, why is the left fighting for what it's fighting for, if not to have things like the useless? And so it's kind of in my perspective, there is a huge amount of privilege in that. But at the same time, if university is universally accessible, then the university can be a space where you can have that kind of privileged experience of the useless. And so it's not necessarily a problem, in a sense. It's more a political problem. It becomes a question of making the university and that kind of experience available to more people, just as high school is. And it's also about making the university, or affirming, it's like, I'm going to argue for it, right? You can disagree with me, but I'm going to argue for it. I'm going to argue for the useless. I'm not going to say everybody has to do useless things. I mean, anthropologists are doing useful things. They're trying to understand things. Social sciences more generally are trying to understand society and so on. So it's very useful. I know anthropology is problematic, especially in terms of colonialism, but that's another question. But and so are the sciences. So is engineering. It helps us find cures for diseases and so on. The university. And so I'm not saying it should always be useless, and that's not the point of my book. But I think what's happened is we've lost. I think I would say literature is the key example. I think literature is dying. The literary departments are dying. And so therefore it's a defense of the value of that. And it's also a bit of a resistance towards using literary to make arguments in favor of kind of social questions. in that sense, then it loses sight of the specificity of literature. And you might as well just read social science texts. The literature has something different to offer. I'm not saying it shouldn't be engaged socially, but I'm saying that we should be, the literary is an experience that is worthwhile for its own sake. So yeah, it's problematic, but at the same time, I'm kind of fighting for that because I value it. It's why I enjoyed university. Also mathematics, you can really go into the minutiae of recondite string theory questions, and it's fascinating for some people. And I mean, I'd never understand the math behind it, but it's not necessarily useful. Or studying why Seneca uses prepositions in certain chapters or whatever. I'm just making this up. Some kind of rare question that is kind of useless, but actually it's part of history. It's part of, so we're also doing history. So in the end, you could say it's useful, but who decides? That's another question. Sorry, very long answer to, but I think it's an important question for sure. Yeah, it's one that haunts and that taunts my book. Yeah.
Okay, so we have one more question there now.
Here we have like 1, 2, 3. 3 questions.
Okay, so perhaps you could like read them all and then we will work
Okay,
up on
I
one.
might need to take notes.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
I'll see if my memory works. No, that's okay. That's okay. That's fine.
O papel isso. Obrigado.
Okay, so the first question is connected to Mariana's question. It's asked by Lincoln Schletzky.
Okay.
Can the university ever be anything but a machine for creating use? I ask seriously because you seem to suggest that there could be another aim of the university. We could, and then he said, we could all study, learn, teach without the university. But the university's evident foundation is turning knowledge into use value, just like encyclopedia. It's an enlightenment project. So that's the first comment. I feel like. Then second one by Rosnay. Sorry. And then he insists on the question: is your book also a work of art? If so, is it the same kind of work of art as Natalie's smartphone, or is it a different kind? Then there's a third question here, 8 October. Emile, did you include endless loops within the pages? Yeah, these are the questions.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. So the first question from Lincoln, are universities machines for breeding use? And so like I agree. I think that universities obviously have a use, a social function, and even saying that it like I did in the part I read, even saying that universities are for building a life. If you agree with that, in a sense, it has a use function. And of course, yeah. So you could study, you could do this stuff outside of the university. And so in a sense, Lincoln's correct. And so, yeah, I would argue the book isn't just about the university, but it is contextualized within this idea of the crisis of the humanities. So I've been thinking about this since I got a job at the University of Victoria. It's like, what are the humanities good for? But I've always resisted this idea that it can be reduced to something like teaching critical thinking or helping us to write better essays so that we can communicate better and therefore become better lawyers or bankers or blah, blah, blah. And then of course, there's this question that I also addressed about the social sciences having a use as well, history having a use. Yeah, so again, I think I agree that the university can have a use, but I think I want to challenge that in some ways. I do want to make it uncomfortable. As I said, I'm not affirming the useless. I'm not, because then I'm just participating in the same problem. And so basically what I think we need to think about is instrumentality, the instrumental rationality of modernity. There are different models of the university. This model of a utilitarian university is a very English model. The German model of the university was for developing free thoughts, for Bildung, the idea of formation. And so, as opposed to a place where you learn dogma or received ideas, it was a place where you could come up with your own thoughts, your own way, you come to that wisdom on your own independently. So that's a very different model of the university. So the Anglo-centric vision of the university is very much utilitarian. There are other models, but still, I mean, you could say that the formation, the Bildung, the formation in the German model is still useful in the sense that it makes citizens, makes democratic citizens, makes citizens who are able to think about questions, political questions in particular, that are important, for sure. But I think at the same time, I am resisting this kind of this utilitarian model, which dominates the modern university. So I know it doesn't fully respond, but I think in a sense that is the spirit of the book. It is there to taunt that question. And Dart insisting on his question is, yes, I think it is a work of art. I do see it as art. It's part of research creation. So that's part of the shirk funding model. So on the one hand, you're doing original research. So there are lots of footnotes in the book. There is a bibliography. There is research done on the concept of the useless and the useful since Plato and Aristotle. But at the same time, that's autopoetic, the self-reflexive element makes it art. And so whether it's like Nathalie's work, it is, in a sense, it's similar. It has a similar logic. I think what Nathalie's work does is to taunt, but at the same time, it has a creative element. So in the research creative model, you have original research, but you also have creative work, and the two kind of speak to each other. And here I'm actually trying to make them indistinct. So it's actually, that's where it's a bit different to what Nathalie is doing, because it kind of blends or confuses the two, research and creation. So yeah, it is similar way, similar kind of spirit to Nathalie's work, but at the same time, a slightly different function and process than Nathalie's work. And then Henry's question of endless loops. Henry's a computer scientist, really good with math. And of course, he's going to ask that question. Endless loops, yes. So the Collat's conjecture is an example of an endless loop. So yeah, I think that's probably the only example of an endless loop. But the other goal of the book is infinitizing. So there is a constraint within so each chapter is constraint, is a constraint, inspired in part by Oulipo, which is a literary movement that worked with constraint as its main creative goal. And but within that, there's an attempt to infinitization. So the Fibonacci is infinite, the Reckermann is infinite. A lot of these, the Collat conjecture isn't, but it does end up, so it's a different kind of infinity. It's a closed infinity. And I'm also at the same time trying to reach for an open infinity. So there's two types of infinity there, but also I guess you could argue that within something you could always have the infinite inside the small versus the infinite of the large, right? So the universe versus the atom, you could go infinitely inwards. So it goes back to Euclid and so on. These questions are addressed. I do write about infinity in some of the endnotes. So yeah.
Então, queria agradecer a todo mundo que está presente aqui. Emile, thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
this. No, I have to eat. Half of the pleasure to eat. Então, legal, gente. Obrigado, viu?
Okay.
Yeah, that's fun.
Hi everyone in Victoria and elsewhere, Paris. Okay, so
Yeah, I think this thing.